The December snow fell steadily over the city, blanketing everything in white and transforming the downtown streets into something that might have been beautiful, if it weren't so bitterly cold. Adrian Stone pulled his black wool coat tighter as he walked toward his car, his breath misting in the frigid air. At 37, he was the CEO of Stone Enterprises, a tech company he'd built from nothing into a multi-million-dollar success. He had everything money could buy: a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling, windows overlooking the city, expensive cars, tailored suits, connections in every important circle. What he didn't have was anyone to share it with. Adrian's marriage had ended 3 years ago when his wife Emily left him, saying she wanted children and he'd never made time for a family. She'd been right, he knew. He'd been married to his work, and by the time he'd realized what he was losing, she was already gone. Now he spent his evenings alone, his weekends in the office, filling the emptiness with meetings and spreadsheets and mergers. He was thinking about the quarterly reports, waiting on his desk when he first noticed her. A small figure sitting in a wheelchair at the bus stop, completely alone. She couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old, with blonde hair pulled into pigtails, and wearing a dark, red dress that was far too thin for the weather. Her legs were secured in braces, and her little hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair as she looked around with increasingly worried eyes. Adrian slowed his pace, scanning the area for an adult. The bus stop was in front of a row of shops, most already closed for the evening. A few people hurried past, heads down against the snow, but no one seemed to belong to the little girl. No parent rushed to her side, no caregiver watched from nearby. The child's lips were turning blue. Adrian stopped walking entirely, his corporate instincts warring with something deeper, something he'd thought he'd lost years ago. He should call someone, the police, child services. He should not get involved. He had a company to run, responsibilities, a carefully ordered life that didn't include small children with special needs, abandoned at bus stops. But then the little girl looked directly at him, and in her eyes he saw something that struck him to his core. Not fear, not pleading, but a terrible, resigned acceptance, as if she'd already learned at such a young age that no one was coming for her. Adrian found himself walking toward her before he'd consciously decided to move. "Hello," he said gently, crouching down so he was at her eye level. Up close he could see she was shivering violently. Her dress was worn and patched. Her shoes were scuffed and too big for her feet, and the wheelchair looked like it had been old when it was new. "What's your name?" "Rosie," she said in a small voice, her eyes searching his face. "Are you going to help me?" "Where are your parents?" Adrian asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Mommy said to wait here." Rosie's voice was matter-of-fact, but her lower lip trembled. "She said someone would come get me. But it's been a really long time, and I'm very cold." Adrian felt something crack open in his chest. "How long have you been here?" "I don't know." Rosie looked at the darkening sky. "It was still light when Mommy left. She said she had to go somewhere important and couldn't take me with her." Adrian closed his eyes briefly, rage and pity warring inside him. What kind of mother abandoned a disabled child at a bus stop in the snow? He pulled out his phone and opened the weather app. The temperature was dropping rapidly with a severe weather warning in effect. If Rosie had been here since afternoon, she'd been alone for hours. "Rosie, I'm Adrian. I'm going to help you, okay? But first I need to ask, do you know where you live? Do you have other family?" Rosie shook her head. "Just Mommy. We lived in a house. But then we had to leave and we've been staying in different places. Mommy gets sad a lot. She cries when she thinks I'm sleeping." Adrian's jaw tightened. He understood abandonment was often born of desperation, but that didn't make it acceptable. This child needed immediate care. She was freezing, possibly had been sitting in the cold for several hours, and there was no telling when or if her mother would return. "All right, Rosie, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get you somewhere warm, and we're going to make sure you're safe. Is that okay? Will Mommy know where to find me?" Despite everything, the child's primary concern was still for her mother. "I'll leave information right here at this bus stop, and I'll report to the authorities where you are. If your mommy comes looking, she'll be able to find you. But right now, we need to get you out of this cold. You're shivering so much." Rosie nodded, and Adrian noticed she didn't have a coat. Just that thin dress and a threadbare blanket draped over her legs. Adrian's car was parked 2 blocks away. He briefly considered calling for it to be brought around. then looked at Rosie's blue lips and made a decision. He took off his expensive wool coat and wrapped it around her small body, then carefully began pushing the wheelchair. "Where are we going?" Rosie asked, her voice muffled by the coat that was far too large for her. "Right now, we're going to my car to get you warm. Then we're going to the hospital to make sure you're okay. After that, we'll figure it out." At the hospital, Adrian stayed with Rosie while doctors examined her. She had mild hypothermia and was severely underweight, but otherwise seemed remarkably resilient. While they worked, Adrian made calls to his lawyer, to Child Protective Services, to the police. He reported finding an abandoned child and gave them all the information Rosie had provided. "We'll need to place her in emergency foster care," the social worker, a tired-looking woman named Janet, explained. "The system is overwhelmed, but we'll find something. It might take a few hours." Adrian looked through the window at Rosie, who was now wrapped in warm blankets, drinking hot chocolate a kind nurse had brought her. She looked so small in the hospital bed, so vulnerable. "What if I kept her?" The words were out before Adrian fully thought them through. Janet looked surprised. "You mean as emergency foster placement?" "Yes, I have the space. More than enough space. I can provide for her needs. Medical care, food, clothing, whatever she requires. Mr. Stone, I appreciate the offer, but emergency fostering requires background checks, home evaluations, training. How long?" "Excuse me? How long would that take?" "Because right now, you're telling me this child is going into an overwhelmed system where she'll be one of dozens of kids. I'm offering her a safe home with someone who's already taken responsibility for her well-being." Janet sighed. "You'd need to be approved as a temporary emergency placement. Given your financial status and the fact that you're the one who rescued her, I could fast-track it, maybe have approval by tomorrow morning. But Mr. Stone, this is a significant commitment. Rosie has special needs. She requires physical therapy, medical attention, specialized care. I can afford all of that. It's not just about money. It's about time, attention, emotional investment. You're a CEO of a major company. Do you really have the bandwidth to care for a disabled child?" Adrian thought about his empty penthouse, his lonely evenings, the life he'd built that felt increasingly hollow. He thought about Rosie's resigned eyes, her acceptance that no one was coming for her. He thought about his ex-wife's words. "You never made time for what really matters." "I'll make time," he said firmly. "Whatever she needs, I'll provide it." By the next morning, Adrian had temporary emergency foster approval. His lawyer had worked through the night. His home had been inspected, and references had been checked. The hospital social worker was satisfied that Rosie would be safe and well cared for. Now came the hard part, building a life he had no idea how to build. Adrian's penthouse was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and expensive, art and absolutely nothing appropriate for a small child. He stood in the middle of his living room, holding Rosie's medical discharge papers, and realized he had no idea what he was doing. "Mr. Adrian?" Rosie's small voice came from where she sat in her wheelchair, looking around with wide eyes. "Is this your house?" "Yes, and you can just call me Adrian, okay? Mr. Adrian sounds like I'm your teacher or something." "It's very big," Rosie said, a note of wonder in her voice. "And very clean. Do you have any toys?" Adrian looked around at his spotless adult space. "No, but we're going to fix that." Over the next week, Adrian's carefully ordered life was turned completely upside down. With the help of a child development specialist and an occupational therapist, he converted one of his spare bedrooms into a space suitable for Rosie. He hired contractors to install ramps and accessibility features throughout the penthouse. He bought toys, books, adaptive equipment, clothes, everything the specialist said a 5-year-old with mobility challenges might need. But more than the physical changes, Adrian found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. He learned to wake up at 6 a.m. to help Rosie with her morning routine, helping her dress, making sure she took her medications, preparing breakfast she would actually eat. He learned to read bedtime stories with character voices, to braid hair, badly at first, then gradually better, to understand which physical therapy exercises hurt and which ones just felt strange. He learned that Rosie loved art, that she could spend hours drawing with markers and crayons, creating elaborate stories about the pictures she made. He learned that she had nightmares about being cold and alone, and that she needed the nightlight left on and his promise that he wouldn't leave. Most importantly, he learned what his ex-wife had tried to tell him. That success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. That money couldn't buy the feeling of a small hand trusting yours. That all the board meetings in the world weren't worth missing the moment a child laughed with pure, uncomplicated joy. "Adrian?" Rosie asked one evening, about 3 weeks after he'd found her. They were having dinner together, something that had become a sacred ritual, with Adrian actually leaving the office at 5 p.m. every day. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you going to send me away? When they find Mommy, or when they find someone else to take me?" Adrian's heart clenched. He set down his fork and looked at this brave little girl who'd been through so much. "Rosie, I need to tell you something. The police are still looking for your mom, but it's been 3 weeks with no word. It's looking like maybe she's not able to take care of you right now." Rosie's eyes filled with tears. "Because of me? Because I can't walk good and I need help?" "No." Adrian moved his chair closer to hers, taking her small hands in his. "Never because of you. You are perfect exactly as you are. Sometimes adults have problems that have nothing to do with their children. It's not your fault and it never was. But where will I go?" Adrian took a deep breath. He'd been thinking about this constantly, had consulted with his lawyer, with social services, with everyone who might have an opinion. The answer, he'd realized, had been obvious from the start. "What if you stayed here with me? Not just for now, but for always? I could become your foster dad officially, and maybe someday, if you wanted, I could adopt you. You'd be my daughter, and this would be your home for real." Rosie stared at him, her eyes huge. "Really? You'd want that?" "I would want that more than anything," Adrian said, and realized it was the truest thing he'd said in years. "These past few weeks having you here, they've been the best of my life. You've taught me what's important. You've made this place feel like a home instead of just an address. So yes, Rosie, I really want you to stay." Rosie launched herself from her wheelchair into his arms, nearly knocking him over. "Yes, yes, please. I want to stay with you." Adrian held her tight, this unexpected gift that had come into his life on a snowy December evening. He thought about the man he'd been, driven, successful but fundamentally alone. He thought about how close he'd come to walking past that bus stop, to leaving Rosie to whatever fate awaited unclaimed children in an overwhelmed system. The formal adoption process took 8 months. Rosie's mother was eventually located. She'd checked herself into a psychiatric facility, overwhelmed by poverty and her own mental health struggles. In a meeting with Adrian and her lawyer present, she tearfully signed over her parental rights, saying she wanted Rosie to have the life she couldn't provide. During those months, Adrian transformed more than just his penthouse. He restructured his entire company's upper management, delegating responsibilities so he could maintain work-life balance. He started a foundation focused on helping families with disabled children access resources and support. He became active in the community of parents navigating childhood disabilities. He became simply Rosie's dad. On the day the adoption was finalized, Adrian stood in the courthouse holding Rosie's hand, now officially her father in every legal sense. His lawyer stood beside them, along with Janet, the social worker who'd been skeptical that first night, now smiling with genuine happiness. "Congratulations, Mr. Stone," the judge said warmly. "Or should I say congratulations, Dad?" "Thank you, Your Honor." Adrian looked down at Rosie, who was beaming in her new dress, red, her favorite color, but warm and well-made and perfect for her. "I'm the lucky one here." After the ceremony, they went out to celebrate at Rosie's favorite restaurant. Over ice cream sundaes, she looked at him with those eyes that had once held such resignation and said, "Adrian? Dad?" "Yes, sweetie? Do you remember that night you found me?" "I remember it every day. I was so cold and I was scared Mommy wasn't coming back. But then you came and you were so nice and you had warm hands." She paused, considering her words carefully. "I think maybe you saved me." Adrian felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I think maybe you saved me too, Rosie. I was lost before I found you. I just didn't know it." "How could you be lost? You had this big house and an important job and everything. Having everything isn't the same as having something that matters. I had success, but I didn't have purpose. I had achievements, but I didn't have love. You taught me the difference." Rosie smiled, that beautiful smile that lit up her whole face. So we saved each other? Yes, we absolutely did. 5 years later, Adrian stood in the audience at Rosie's elementary school, watching as his 10-year-old daughter sang in the holiday concert. She still used her wheelchair. Though intensive physical therapy had improved her mobility significantly, she still had challenges that other kids didn't face. But she was confident, joyful, surrounded by friends who valued her for exactly who she was. After the concert, Rosie wheeled over to him, her face flushed with excitement. "Did you see me, Dad? Did I do good?" "You were perfect," Adrian said, hugging her tight. "I'm so proud of you." "There's someone I want you to meet," Rosie said, and Adrian noticed a woman standing nearby, attractive, maybe in her mid-30s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "This is Miss Caroline. She's the new music teacher." "Mr. Stone, it's nice to meet you," Caroline said, extending her hand. "Rosie talks about you all the time. You're quite the hero in her stories. Please call me Adrian." "And I'm not the hero here. Rosie's the brave one." "No, Dad, you are," Rosie insisted. "You found me when no one else stopped. You took care of me when you didn't have to. You chose me." Adrian felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the overwhelming gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. "We chose each other, Rosie. That's how families work." Later that evening, as he tucked Rosie into bed, something he still did every night. Even as she grew older, she asked him about Caroline. "Do you think she's pretty, Dad?" Adrian smiled. "I think she seems very nice. She asked me if you were dating anyone. I said no. Was that okay?" "That was fine." "Why do you ask?" "Because you're always taking care of me, but no one takes care of you. I think maybe you should have someone, not instead of me," she added quickly, "but also someone who makes you happy like I make you happy." Adrian was struck by his daughter's emotional intelligence, her ability to think beyond her own needs. "That's very thoughtful of you, sweetheart. But I am happy. You make me happier than I ever thought possible." "I know. But Dad, you taught me that love doesn't run out when you give it to more people. It multiplies. You said that when I was worried about you adopting me, meaning you didn't love your work anymore." Adrian laughed, remembering that conversation from years ago. "You're right. I did say that. And it's true. So maybe you could love me and someone else. Because you have a really big heart, big enough for lots of people." As Adrian turned out the light and closed Rosie's door, he thought about the journey they'd been on together. From that snowy bus stop to this warm home. From a lonely CEO and an abandoned child to a real family. He thought about second chances and unexpected gifts, and how the worst day of someone's life can become the best day of someone else's. The next week, when he ran into Caroline at a coffee shop, he found himself accepting her invitation to dinner. 3 months later, she met Rosie officially as more than just her teacher. 6 months after that, they were a couple. And Rosie was delighted to have someone else to share her stories with. Someone else to love her dad. On the 5-year anniversary of the day he'd found Rosie, Adrian took her back to that bus stop. It looked different now. The city had renovated it. Added better lighting, a heated shelter. But he could still see exactly where Rosie's wheelchair had been, where he'd first seen those resigned eyes. "Do you remember this place?" he asked gently. "I remember being really cold. And scared, and thinking no one would come." Rosie looked up at him. "But you did come." "I almost didn't. I almost walked past. But you didn't. You stopped. You saw me. That's what matters." Adrian crouched down beside her wheelchair, just as he had that first night. "You know what I've learned, Rosie? Sometimes the moments that change our lives completely look like small decisions. I could have walked past. I could have just called the authorities and kept going. But something made me stop, and that decision changed everything." "It changed everything for both of us," Rosie said wisely. She reached out and took his hand. "Dad, I want to tell you something." "Anything, sweetheart." "I used to be sad that my first mom left me. I used to think something was wrong with me. But now I understand that sometimes things have to fall apart, so they can come together better. If she hadn't left me here, you wouldn't have found me. We wouldn't be a family." "That's a very mature way to look at it. I'm not sad anymore." "I'm grateful. Because I got you, and you're the best dad anyone could want. Not because you have money, oh,